This guy is called, he's still alive, I've got to know him quite well, he's called Alan Godfrey, and he joined the police in 1975. He had to retire in 1985 through ill health caused by a severe beating he took whilst he was at work from some burglars. When we talk about the subject of abductions, it's not something I generally talk about a great deal. Not that I don't believe in it, I do, but the reason why I don't talk about it much is because if you're talking to a general audience and I suddenly say I believe in aliens and abductions, it's so far off most people's credibility scale that they just look at me and go, "You nutter." But if you say, well, I know a couple of pilots and they've had some sightings, then the public will go, "Oh, okay, tell us a bit more." Because they can relate to a pilot seeing something, or they can relate to a police officer seeing something. But abductions, if you're not aware of the subject, is a very real phenomenon. It is real. And I could talk at length and have lectured on the subject, but that's a separate lecture. Suffice to say that the only confirmed abduction scenario case that I believe is on the database is this guy. And basically on the 29th of November 1980, he was on night duty. He was a uniformed officer, and he was on nights, and his shift finished at 6 o'clock in the morning, 0600 hours. There'd been some strange reports during the night that believe it or not, a group of cows had been wandering around the streets in this little rural town called Todmorden in West Yorkshire. And various police cars had been out looking for these cows, but had never found them. But every now and again there'd be a phone call saying, "I've just seen a cow go past my house," which is a bit bizarre. So anyway, as would happen, at the end of his shift, about 5 o'clock, an hour before he was due to go off, he was basically told, "Alan, go take out a patrol car one last time, have a look for these cows. Because we don't want to go off duty at 6 o'clock and then somebody at 6:10 coming on shift finds these cows and makes it look like we've done nothing all night." And believe it or not, that is a common sense attitude. Nobody wants to get ribbed by their colleagues. So basically he went out on his own in a police car, and he thought he was driving along what's called Burnley Road in Todmorden, a little rural town, and he was going to turn up onto what's called Fernley Estate, quite a notorious housing estate, and he's got his indicator on and he's just about to turn right off a main road, when suddenly, as he's about to turn right, he suddenly sees something up the road and initially thinks it's a bus that's skidded off in the distance up the road and blocked the road. So he cancels his indicator and he drives towards what he thought initially was a bus that had skidded across the road. But it wasn't a bus, it was this. And that is blocking the road. And it's 5 feet off the ground, 2 metres off the ground, 1 to 2 metres off the ground. His car headlights are reflecting off the underside. And as he will often say when he's asked in interviews, if I had a brick, I drove that close to it, I could have thrown it and it would have gone bang. That's how close it was. And he stops within 30 feet of the object that is hovering silently in the middle of this road. And it's about 5:10 in the morning. Now, because it's November time, he describes the object going anti-clockwise. The bottom half of it is moving anti-clockwise, and because of the centrifugal force, all the nearby trees are swirling around, and because it's November and autumn, all leaves have gathered in a circle underneath where the object is. He watches it, he goes for his main radio, his personal radio, it's dead, can't raise anybody. He then goes for the main set inside the police car to alert people. That's dead. He has a clipboard next to his seat and he starts drawing the object, and this is his drawing of the object. The top part of it has what appears to be dark and black windows. Doesn't see any objects inside, but that's as he described it. 20 feet by 14 feet, 5 feet off the ground. So basically 5 metres in height, 4 metres wide. 2 metres off the ground, blocking the road. He then gets a bit curious and he gets out of the police car and he begins to walk towards this object. Well, if we're talking about 30 feet, it's probably from here to the back of the room. Probably less. That's how close it is. As he walks towards it, even though there's no noise and it's hovering there, he becomes frightened and he thinks, no, I'm going to go back to the police car. He says that as he gets back to the police car and he's about to get in the police car, suddenly, what he describes is he is engulfed by a bright white light. An incredible white light all surrounds him. And the next thing he remembers, and this is important, let's talk about 1980. So this is prior to the X-Files, prior to the Communion, which was coming out, a book by Whitley Strieber, which shows this typical alien head with the big eyes. So it's just about that time, but it's prior to the X-Files when most people become associated with that image of what's called an alien grave. And basically the next thing he remembers, he's in a room. He doesn't know where he is and he's laid down on a table. And this is 1980. He doesn't describe these things as greys, he describes them in his own terminology. And he describes about 7 or 8 small creatures that he describes as lamp heads, which is not a bad description actually, what we now know, and bulb heads were putting things on his legs and scurrying around. And then a short time later he sees what he describes as a humanoid figure with a beard and wearing a gown of some description. And there's no talk, and the next thing he remembers is that the humanoid figure is saying to him, his lips out, the person in the gown, his lips out moving, but he's getting the message, you're safe. The next thing he remembers in his conscious memory is he is driving down the road on the other side of where the object was, about 100 metres further down the road. So he stops as he's sighting. He doesn't know about this part yet, which I've just told you. That's what's in his subconscious mind that comes out later. And basically, from the point he goes back to get into the police car and he sees the white light, the next thing he remembers is he's driving down the road. Where's it gone? Looks around, spins the car around, goes back and the object's gone, but he finds that there is this circular pattern where the object had been. And it had been raining during the night, and just at the bottom, underneath it, it was noticeably drier within the centrifugal area than outside. He races back to the police station and he sees an officer called Malcolm Hagley, who's on foot, just about to go in the police station. He says to him, Malcolm, get in his car, you're never going to believe me. I've just seen a flying saucer. Yeah. No, I have. And he takes him back and he takes him back to this circular patch. Now I've spoke to that officer, traced him, and he says, yeah, I didn't see a craft, but he took me back to a circular patch and I can't account for it. And it was noticeably dry. So he backs that a bit up. The next thing that happens is they then, where this sighting was, it was next to a park called Centerville Park, and there was a big wall. There's a barrier and it was locked. And then suddenly, they've been looking for cows all night, then suddenly they hear, and it was coming from in the park. Good impression, right? And on the rugby pitch, when they climbed over the wall, was 6 cows in the middle of a rugby pitch. And they're going, how the hell did they get in here? Okay, so that's just an interesting anecdote that people don't know. They then go back to the police station, and from Alan's point of view, he's thinking it is about 5:30, and he's still got another half an hour to go. But one of his colleagues says, come on, we'll let off. He goes, what? He says, we'll let off. It's 6:10. He says, what do you mean it's about 5:30? He says, no, it's 6:10. And he'd lost some time. This guy is a no-nonsense policeman. He doesn't suffer fools gladly. And a couple of months later, some UFO researchers came to see him. And they said, because his story had been in the local paper, and he got ribbed a bit, but no big deal. These UFO researchers knocked on his door and said, did you have any kind of odd experience? And he said, well, I saw this thing. And he said, well, was there anything odd about it? And he says, well, I couldn't account for about 25, 30 minutes of time. And the guy, and it's this guy who was did a lot of good research in the 80s and the early 90s called Harry Harris, who was a solicitor, said, would you undergo some hypnosis if I get a professor at Manchester University to regress you, just to see what comes out while you're under hypnosis? And he said, no, not interested. 3 months later, they'd been back again. He was had some sleepless nights, and he was perturbed because he had a new pair of boots on that night, and when he got back, he realised that one of his boots was split underneath his foot. And where it was split, when he took his sock off, there was a red mark that was itching, scratching, and it was all inflamed, and he had to go to a doctor and get some ointment, and it went off after about 7 days, cleared up. But he didn't know where it come from. He didn't have it going at the beginning of the shift. Didn't really relate anything to it at the time. Harry Harris, the solicitor, says, let me arrange this. So after 3 months, he says, okay. And basically what happens is that he meets with a Professor Blair at Manchester University, and this professor is told that it's not anything to do with UFOs. It's just an officer has got some kind of block time. Can you try to unlock what happened on that night? He was not given any brief hint that it was UFO related. He gets all hooked up to heart monitors and various bits and pieces of electrical equipment. And this professor, Blair, regresses him, and he's then under hypnosis. And suddenly this story emerges that when the bright white light is in the room, he sees the creatures putting things on his legs, he sees the man in the gown. And then the next thing is he's back driving the police car, and it's filled in that gap. Professor Blair was so shocked by what he heard, he says, I don't want to tell Alan this. It's bizarre. He then realised it was something he'd never dealt with before. And he says, we're not going to tell Alan what it is. I want him to go to see another professor called Professor Jaffe at Manchester University. And I'm not going to tell Professor Jaffe, I just want him to repeat the experiment, as it were. The first session was not on video. He subsequently has 3 more sessions all recorded on video, about 45 minutes each one. And in each one he tells the same story. And this bit that's emerged, being in a craft. Now, in 1980, there were just about no British abduction cases. I don't know of one that was in the public domain. So this is Britain's first major abduction case. There had been some abduction stories, most famously the Barney and Betty Hill case from 1961 in America, and Anthony Villalobos in South America in 1957. But people just thought this was so far out. But this guy has all the classic signs of what would now be considered, after serious research, missing time, bright white light, in a room, being examined by small creatures. And an interesting thing is, when he was asked questions about describe the equipment, he started to get intense pain so badly that they had to stop the interview, as if to say, well, you're not allowed to talk about this. He's been programmed in a way that anything really hard, evidential question, they had to take him out because his heart monitor was all over the place and it was getting a bit dangerous. But he told it consistently on 4 occasions, 3 of which are on video. I have 1 or 2 clips, and I could talk and take you through some of that. I investigated that case for 18 months. If he's lying, he deserves an Oscar. He does some things under hypnosis that only a truthful person would do, in my opinion. He does little mannerisms, he pulls faces, he does things with his feet that seem to be spontaneous, as if he's reliving the experience for real. And I think it's a very good case. We now know that in a lot of abduction cases there are physical examinations, there are often scoop marks, indentations in the skin. Sometimes you may have even heard of alien implants. Well, believe it or not, I met a surgeon called Dr. Roger Lear. He's a podiatrist, he's a foot surgeon, but he has worked with over 13 people who have claimed to have objects in their bodies, that there was no entry wound, and that it's shown up on X-ray scans that they believe have in some way related to abduction experiences. And when those have been taken out, they've all been covered in a membrane that you couldn't cut with a scalpel. They're all about the size of a pea. Some varying shapes, but generally the size of a pea, with a membrane around that you couldn't cut with a scalpel. Inside, it's terrestrial elements put together, metals, but put together in an unconventional way. And there's like an oily substance inside which nobody can understand. So there is, it's a far out, I know, but there is a facet of this that says if the abduction phenomena is real, that there is some kind of tracking devices, and a lot of people say that with abductions, it often starts in childhood and you're abducted many times throughout your life, and maybe your parents were and things like that. Who knows, but there would appear to be some solid evidence in factual cases. And I've met Roger Lear several times and seen some of the operations that he's done and all the analysis that's done, and he's trying to get papers published in medical research journals, but because it's such a far off topic, nobody will even put it in, even though he's got evidential papers and everything's done right. It's all done on video, everything is analysed. Some really strange spectrometer research and things like that. He can't get it published. So this guy here is a very important case because it's Britain's first abduction case, and I really could talk about it for a long time. I ended up writing a screenplay about his story, not so much about his encounter, although that was a large part of it, but because of what happened to him afterwards when he hit the national press and the world press, and literally the police force got very nasty towards him and tried to make him out that he was a nutter. Put him on a psychological testing evaluation without asking him, said it was just a false medical, transferred him without telling him, and said to his colleagues that he's been moved because he's been stealing stuff, and he's told that he's moving because it's a career development. Lots of things. So he got a lot of hassle until he retired. But a great case, and a no-nonsense man. Okay, this case, I'm going to speed up a little bit now. This is a good one that's come to me. Anybody who's researched this subject will know that in the early 40s and 50s, when we were developing nuclear weapons, there was big interest in UFOs in nuclear facilities. Not only power plants, research centres, and obviously military nuclear facilities. And it's not a great picture, but the guy is pointing to over a lake to a power station in Wales. It's up in the hills, and basically he was the rural policeman, and has this sighting with his wife, and he sees that object initially over the house, and then it goes and hovers above that big white building in the middle of the photograph. And that was a nuclear power station, which is now closed down. But he said, if anybody had said that I'd seen this, I was the archest skeptic, but I've seen it now and I have to believe. And that's a common thing that comes out. This is a great one about a green sphere. This guy on the left was a part-time special constable, so he did it as a hobby, but he did it part-time. He wasn't paid, but he was sworn in as a special police constable, and he would go out and patrol with officers for so many hours per week, so many hours per month. Well, he's just about to go on duty with a colleague who's another special, and they're driving along a two-lane, we would call it two-lane dual carriageway in England, but 2 lanes on one side, and then you'd have the middle, and then you'd have 2 lanes on the other side. And he's driving, just going to work, and suddenly a green sphere the size of a car pulls alongside of him. I think you'd be a bit, like he was, and he's very frightened to talk about that. Very reluctant, very nervous. It shook him up a great deal. So much so that he came to me and he says, the guy who was with me, I said, he was encouraging him to come forward to me, but he wouldn't. The other guy wouldn't. He says, I just can't deal with it. And that's the effect on some police officers and people in general. I've been told many times by police officers, go see that guy, he's told us about a great UFO story. And you go to them and you say, I understand you've got a UFO story, and they say, I don't want to talk about it. And you try to get them talking, they say, I don't want to talk about it. They don't say it doesn't happen, they just say they don't want to talk about it. So what do you deduce? That it's either something that's affected them so badly that they're not able to deal with it in a rational, post-traumatic kind of way. This guy, this is a new case that's come to me. He's still a serving officer. And it's generally retired officers, but this guy's quite happy to have his name out there. And he has this sighting. He's a Metropolitan Police officer. But what's interesting about this, it's multiple corroborated, 2 officers on mobile patrol, and he says, since the 80s there's been a lot of triangular sightings. Okay, but he sees a large black triangle, low to the ground, 7 to 8 minute duration. Look at that. The size of 3 football fields. Wow. When directly above it blocked out the sky and the stars. That's how big it was. What motivation is for this guy to come and make this story up to me? No. He's not going to get any money. Is he going to get fame, fortune? No. He risks ridicule. But he's doing it because he knows there's an organisation now where those kind of stories can come out, and he can feel that alongside many others now, he's not quite an utter, and he can say to people, well, this guy collects these sightings and there's actually quite a few hundred of us, and I'll talk about the numbers in a minute. Just above the rooftops, can you imagine, just above this theatre, we see an object the size of 3 football fields. Can't get that wrong in the description, I don't think, unless he's lying. Why is he lying? People report these kind of things regularly. When he got back, he reported it over the air. Do you want to make an official police report? He went, no. So it was reported, but not reported, if you see what I mean. In the end, he didn't submit a report to the Ministry of Defence. And the real reason is because he feared a risk to his career, risk ridicule, getting out to the press. Now he's older, he's not so bothered. He wants to be standing up and be counted. This is a great one. I'm sure you've got traffic police that just police motorways and the roads. 2 officers parked up on a motorway, and then suddenly a missile, what they describe as a missile-shaped object, 9 metres in length, low to the ground, passes by them in their police car. Wow. 2 officers, multiple corroboration. No noise, windows down. This is a good one. Radar confirmed. Manchester radar contact Kidlington Police, which is a local police station, and say, look, we've got an object, a static object on radar. Can you just check it out? So they sent 2 police officers to a high observation area, and it's a beauty picnic place called Mow Cop. And from this vantage point, they look down and they see an object that's where the radar says it is. Well, it's there for 2 hours. And it's putting a beam down to the ground, different colours. And the officer who was in charge of them, Superintendent Groker, actually goes into the media and says, look, these are fine officers. I believe what they're saying. Which is not very often for senior officers. This case we could talk about for quite a while because it's one of Britain's best ever cases, and it's the biggest one on the database because over 24 police officers are involved in that, and I still think there's a lot more. But 24 that I know, and I've just added an extra 4. There was 4 that was last year, and I've just added an extra 4 this year to take it to 24. Because as the case becomes more well-known, officers come forward and approach me. And basically this is a triangular object that's seen over many counties, moving from a north to south direction towards Devon and Cornwall. 24 police officers. So 2 policemen here, 2 policemen there, 1 there, over several counties. This is a good one. Most people, I would think, in this room will have heard of the national landmark of Stonehenge, an ancient monument. Well, from time to time they have the summer solstice and they have lots of people gathering, but it wasn't always the case, and on this one occasion they had 12 police officers guarding the actual monument to stop people going near it. And whilst these 12 officers are guiding it, they're all chatting, basically one of them says, "What's that?" And they all look up and they see an object doing this. Like, you know, a castle wall? Right angle, up, down, right angle, up, down, across the sky, and they watch it, all 12 of them. And this guy comes forward and tells us about this story. Never officially reported, no noise, but the movements make it UFO. Right angle turns across the sky like a castle wall. This is a good one. This was, there was a lot of tension for 30 years between England and Northern Ireland, and there was a lot of people with terrorism and the IRA, things like that. During that time, the police there were called the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and in 1999, this was still going on, and all off-duty officers would carry a sidearm, even when you're off-duty, because a lot of RUC officers were murdered by IRA. So they all had a weapon. And he was out with his wife, and they come across a rural road, and they see this object in the sky. And he gets out, and he says to his wife, "Stay in the car, and I'm going to look." And he follows it, and he stands underneath it. This huge light. And then suddenly, gone. 100 metres above the road. And he says, "I was so frightened, I nearly got my gun out." What he was going to do, I don't know, but he obviously felt frightened enough to think that something was going to happen. What's the motivation for that guy coming up with a story like that? I would say none at all. This is important because we now move into politics. 2003, the MOD began to separate certain cases from what they would call credible witnesses. Police officers, pilots, things like that. So here you have, this is a loose minute, which is an internal Ministry of Defence document, one civil servant to another. So that's what you've got, loose minute. There's a reference number, there's the date. Credible witness report, basically it's a UFO report seen by police officers and helicopter crew, which is a radar station, Swanwick. RAF Neatershead, another radar station. Is there anything of defence interest? So even though they're saying that they've separated it and it's a credible witness, police officers, radar, look at the date, 17th of November, it's a questions going in, is there anything of defence significance? The next day, credible witness report, blah, 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 blah. I can now confirm the incident does not represent anything of defence interest. Why? Does that follow any logic? You've got a police helicopter crew, you've got police officers seeing it, and there's nothing on radar at two places. Object there that's been visually seen, but it's of no defence significance. They can do what they want. And in reality, the politics says that in Britain, there's never been one case, according to the MOD, that's been of defence significance. In reality, what that really means is that unless the UFO fires or injures you, then they can come and go and do what they want, but we will never report it as being of defence significance. That's exactly what it means. This is an actual traffic car video. So I'm going to take this out and make this work. Get my mouse back, and here we go. This is, forget this light in the front, that's just a recording light. This is a traffic car with a front-mounted camera, that's just a recording light. This is a traffic police car, rural road in Yorkshire. Just watch for the objects in the right-hand corner of the screen. There. Now, it's not great quality, but this driver, who was on his own, described this was a group of lights all together. Not just one light, as it looks there, but he says there were literally hundreds of small white lights clustered together, and he watches it, and you see his speed dropping now. This is daylight. It's about to get dark. Daylight, we can see it, we can see it, we can see it. It's going. It's going. And this is in 2003. It's been analysed by various scientists, ruled out atmospheric phenomena. I've tracked it, we've actually been back to the spot, unknown object. Description of the officer is important though. A collection of white lights clustered together. Next one. This is a recent case, just in this year. 2005, rural location. There's a police car there. I've asked him to go back in his police car, still a serving officer, and show me exactly where it happened. And that's where it happened. That was his viewpoint. 50 metres altitude, no noise, rural area, 9 metres in size. How often are we saying this about these sightings? Same characteristics, no noise. It would move fast and then slow, fast and then slow. Jerky movements. And interestingly, he says something that's a bit interesting. No, there was some interference with his police radio. Didn't stop the car, but he had some interference on his radio, so he couldn't contact anybody. But the interesting thing was, he said, I got a pain in my head. When the object was there, I got a pain in my head. When the object went, the pain went. Might be nothing, but who knows? It's not the first time that's been described. This is, there's 2 video clips of this, and you're going to see this from actual police UFO footage, off-duty taken by a man and wife couple in northern England. And the 2 mobile phone clips, one 11 seconds, one 12 seconds, but it's broad daylight, and they describe man and wife off-duty, back garden looking out, rural location, and they see what they describe. And if it's, this is why it's important, this footage, if their description is right, then it could be a very important case, not only just for police, but generally. It's the cigar-shaped objects. Cigar-shaped objects in daylight aren't seen very often. They describe this object as 60 to 100 metres long. That's pretty big. No noise. And it is moving across the sky for 30 minutes, and it's tumbling. Sometimes it's stood up. But this is not airborne, it's clearly metallic, and you'll see that in the clips. Okay? At one point, one of the clips, and I'll tell you what's there so you can look for it, it's upright, there's no visible means of propulsion. If the dimensions are even only half what they describe, because it's low altitude, then it's still huge, and it's upright, and it's turning on its axis. And you will see that it's a metallic glint, it's a bright blue sky, and then you can see that as it turns, the sun's gone off it. So you can see that. And then you'll see the second clip. So here we go. See the sun on it as it's rotating? And suddenly you'll see the sun turn away. Strange noise in the background, don't know what that is. So it's a long cylindrical object. Do you want me to play that again? Just so you can see that effect of the sun on it as it's rotating. And it's staying in the sky, 30 minutes. Huge dimensions. How is it staying in the sky? It's not a balloon, because if a balloon goes. Thermals can't stop and just hover. You can see in relation to the clouds that it's not really moving. It's within its own space. Okay, so now I'll click onto the next clip, because there's a second clip. You can see by the clouds in the background, it's hardly moving. Now what could stay in the sky of those dimensions for 30 minutes? No noise, obvious noise. No obvious means of propulsion there, no engines. So what I did is, he also took some photographs as well as the video. And because it was a decent lens on the camera, I've got some good stills, which I've then enhanced. So we end up with a situation where we get a nice, good photograph, that isn't it? Quite sharp. Something obviously cylindrical, obviously in there. You can see the light off the top. Now he did say that he saw what may have been a red light at one end. But we'll see what happens when we take a close-up. Now I'd say that's the sun or a light glinting off the top, but there seems to be some strange protrusion at the end. But this is a cylinder that he's saying is estimated at 90 metres in length plus. And it's staying in the sky, it's tumbling, rotating on its own axis. Well, I can't think of a plane, a microlight, a paraglider, atmospheric phenomena, all those things go out the window for the duration of the sighting. The upright, the turning its own axis, the tumbling, the no obvious kinds of engines, propulsion. Then another sighting. This guy, this is the very latest sighting, come in 29th September, so it's this year. Literally, only last month, or just a few days ago. This is a daytime sighting. He was a 30-year retired police officer, police constable. He's come back what's now what's called a PCSO, a police support officer. Still a police officer, but he's not full-time. He's still with Cheshire Police. And that's him getting his long service medal. Corroborated sighting, he's with another officer when this happened. Now the interesting thing about this is the first case where I've had official confirmation that some police forces are now being directed to send their police reports to me. And how can I say this? Is because of this. This is his sighting. This is the object which is described as like a bell-shaped object. The one on the right where he's put the word UFO exclamation mark just below the cloud, and it was coming in and out of cloud, and it seemed to be watching two planes that crisscrossed in the sky. Not a great drawing, but there you go. That's his police pocketbook. So he's actually written this in his notebook, his official police notebook. I wrote in 2009 to 38 police forces in Britain when the MOD suddenly announced that it was closing its UFO desk. I wrote to them and said, look, I've got a database for police officers. I've been running it since 2002. Would you please consider sending me your police reports that you're still going to get, because they get generally about 600 sightings a year, 300 to 600 sightings a year. And you're going to be getting members of the public ringing up, and they're often going to be very distressed, not know what they've seen. Would you consider putting them in touch with me so I can investigate them? And believe it or not, of the 38 forces, 24 came back and said, we didn't have a clue about this, thanks for bringing it to our attention, and we'll consider it. Of those, 2 forces quite quickly came back and said, we'll appoint you as what's called a single point of contact, a SPOC. There's a lot of this now in police forces. It's a single point of contact that somebody goes to if you want to get something about fraud. You'll go to one person and you just go through all the rigmarole of the forms that you've got to fill in. Okay, so initially 2 forces adopted me, which were Humberside Police and Suffolk Police. And of that, that's all I knew. I'd had a phone call saying, yeah, we're adopting you. Okay. The bizarre thing was, and it gets a bit sinister now, is that one of the chief constables that I wrote to, even though it was a private letter, because I was asking for police information and data protection issues, I said, look, I'm a police officer. I told them which force I was and that I got this database. What happened was one of the chief constables of the police force rang up my chief constable, who I'd written to as well, and basically belittled him and said, who's your UFO guy? Who's this nutter who you got working for you? And because he said it in that tone, my chief constable felt embarrassed, even though it was a private letter, but he instructed that I be done for misconduct for bringing the force into disrepute, even though it was a private act to a private letter, and I'd only given the letter and told them which force I belonged to for credibility. So I was asking for private information. The bottom line was that as a result of that, I ended up with a 12-month written warning, which had something about in that 12 months I could have got sacked, just for writing a private letter to chief constables about UFOs. Now, you could argue that it breached my human rights and all that, but if you're in a disciplined organisation, you can't beat the system. So I had to say, yeah, okay, I did say which force I belonged to, and there you go, 12-month written warning, which is now passed, so that's good. But it means that now I operate slightly different, because there is more pressure on me now. What I can say, what I don't say. But I still say it. But, you know, one of the reasons why I'm thinking of retiring in 18 months' time instead of going in about 5 or 6 years' time. That'll be a chapter in a book that I plan to write. But anyway. Several forces now refer their police officers to me, and the proof of the pudding came in this actual last sighting that's come to me. And why? Because I said, well, have you got the incident log that was raised because you reported it officially? Yeah, I've got a copy of the incident log. Can you send it to me? When he sent it to me, I deal with incident logs all the time. You know, a cat stuck in a tree, it'll have an incident log. And they all tend to follow the same pattern. Well, That's what an incident log looks like. And it'll have an incident number on the left-hand corner, the date and time it was created, it'll say where was the origin of the first message, that kind of thing. And then it lists all the officers that were allocated to it. There's a lot of legal jargon in there, a lot of computer jargon, but that's what a front page of an incident log. So if there was a murder, there would, or any incident, there would be one of these. Always one of these. And they're kept for 7 years. But on page 2, I was quite staggered to see this. Report from a police officer. This is what they've put, not what I've put. Create another record, an incident. But the interesting thing there is inform the officer that they can report the officer to DC Gary Heseltine at www.proofforcepolicedatabase.co.uk, my website. DC Heseltine collects and investigates sightings of UFOs witnessed by serving police officers. And that is brilliant for me, because it means, in a sense, even though I may have some pressure on me now, that a lot of the police forces are now recognising that this is a legitimate tool for police officers, at the very least, that they're saying to police officers, you've had a sighting, you want to report it, that's the guy you report it to. And they wouldn't have known that if I hadn't wrote those 38 letters. Even though I got disciplined, it was worth it for that. Because that's kind of an official endorsement that they are now referring police officers officially to me, which is not only a big plaudit for me, but it's a plaudit for the database, and it proves that the job I'm doing is a worthwhile thing, because they now have an outlet for officers and it's now official, which is a major breakthrough. The one that got away. I've got 5 minutes left before I get shot. Right, this is a case a lot of people in this room will know about crop circles. Well, this case came to me second-hand from a police officer who's been in about 10 years, and he said, my sergeant tells a brilliant story about a crop circle and 2 UFOs. I said, oh, well, I want to talk to him. Well, he's a bit shy. He says he didn't really want to talk about it. He says he was with another officer. She didn't want to talk about it either. I'd really try to get him to come forward. And the story was that in 1991 in Wales, 2 officers, the sergeant and another officer, female officer, are on mobile patrol, and they suddenly see, high up in the hillside, they see 2 objects move in weird and wonderful angles, dancing above the sky, just as the light is coming up at the beginning of the day. They then shoot off. Light comes up, so it's like maybe 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, and guess what? Underneath where the lights were, there was a new crop circle. Now, can you imagine how important that case would have been if that officer was willing to go on the record? A confirmation of UFOs and crop circles in close proximity to each other. There's been many rumoured reports, but nobody's ever really come forward and tied it up, and that would have been a major breakthrough case. But it's the case that got away. Because the guy won't come forward, and I have to respect that. But did it happen? The guy didn't say it didn't happen, he just didn't want to talk about it. And I have to respect that. 9th report, after 9 years, this is where it all boils down to. On-duty cases, this is the 9th report. Once a year I do an annual report. It's the only way I can do it over and above my police work. This year I've just completed it. You're getting the figures first in this room. It's never been released yet. On-duty cases, 52 cases. On-duty cases reported while it's going on, involving 85 officers. Off-duty cases, 16, including 18, so that might be like man and wife couples, or friends who see things off-duty. Total new cases, 68 and 103. We add that to the other 8 reports that I've done since 2002, and this is what we get. 425 police cases between 1901 and 2011, you've just seen the most recent one, involving 903 British police officers. We're not far from that magic 1,000 figure. 9 years of research, 903 officers. Conclusions? 3/4 when I start looking at analysis, I'm not a big lover of statistics, cutting a long story short, 3/4 of other cases are multiple officer corroborated. So don't let anybody say to you that this is an officer that's 3 in the morning, he's tired and he's just confused. This isn't. This is 3/4 of the cases. That's 300 cases plus that are multiple officers. Given the characteristics that I went to at the start, you can see how many of the sightings fall into the regular patterns, the spheres, the discs, the triangles, the green spheres, the no noise, the sudden accelerations, the right angle turns. They fall into what we know of the subject. And I think I've only scratched the tip of an iceberg. The future for me, I look to write a Proof Wars book next year with a view to coming out as I retire, because that would be the logical time to do it. I want to concentrate on more UFO research, but I also work on the very famous Rendlesham Forest case as well, which you may have heard of, you may not, you may want to ask a question about where that's going, which I talk about there. I've written a film script with the guy who's involved, and this is nuclear weapons, UFOs, multiple UFOs seen outside a US military base in England. Over 3 successive nights I'm working with Colonel Charles Holt. He was the guy, the deputy base commander of the nuclear facility. So it's been written in conjunction with him. And that is it. They're here. They're already here. I want to thank Exopolitics Denmark for inviting me here. They've been fantastic. They're brilliant hosts. They are trying to do an absolutely unique job. They are battling against the media suppression of the subject, and maybe when we end it here, we'll have some questions and I can talk to you about media and why things don't get reported and whatever. But they are doing a valuable role. And anybody in here who has come along thinking, well, I've had a sighting, but I've had something, but I don't really know what to do about it. If you haven't told anybody, go grab one of the Exopolitics Denmark group, and they will treat you sympathetically, they will listen to you, they will not condemn you, they will not ridicule you. There's a guy who approached me who's had 4 sightings. I'd like him to go over to one of the Exopolitics people, because the more people come forward, the more people can start to raise the awareness that this is a very real subject, but you're just not told about it. I appreciate your audience. I appreciate it's late at night. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.